And of course, at the back of that powerful documentary, we now speak to newly appointed South African Editors Forum Chair, Sbu Ngalwa, who of course takes the reins of the forum soon. Ngalwa will take over from Mahlase, whose term is coming to an end. SANEF also today awarded its prestigious Nat Nakasa Award to all journalists who have been reporting on the coronavirus pandemic. You would have seen that very powerful documentary there of journalists and really sharing gut-wrenching stories. And Sbu, of course, tonight we begin by congratulating you. You're not only our politics editor here at Newzroom Afrika, you've also just been appointed SANEF chair. How are you feeling about that?
Thank you very much, Bongi. Obviously, I'm honored to be appointed as the new SANEF chairperson, but I think that the enormity of the position and the role that we have to play, I'm actually alive to that. I'm aware of the role that we have to play, and also the fact that I'm elected at a time when the industry is going through great difficulty, as COVID-19 has actually dealt us a heavy blow. Not only have we lost colleagues or have had colleagues fall sick or get infected by COVID-19, but also our industry is limping. And we've seen a number of organizations and media publications and also publishers shutting down. So I think my taking over at SANEF is actually at a very important but also a critical point for us as an organization and also for us as the media fraternity.
And it comes at a time, Sbu, as we have heard, even, some of those that were speaking in that documentary, really talking about possible job losses here. Newsrooms are shrinking.
That is exactly what is happening, Bongi, because, as SANEF, we did actually a dipstick research where we just wanted to see how bad the situation was, and what we had done was actually to look at the impact, what has happened in newsroom between the time when we declared a lockdown at the end of March and to around June. And in that time alone, we actually realized that over 700 journalists had lost their jobs, and actually 80 small publications had been affected. And as you would know, subsequent to that, you've had publishers closing down, Bongi. You and I grew up at a time where we had Yobona magazine being synonymous with our growing up. You would remember anyone who has a photograph, who takes a picture holding a telephone receiver or under a tree, you would say that is the Bona pose. Because so much was Bona magazine, it was so ubiquitous in our lives that those are kind of institutions. To actually see them fold actually is a sad reality. And in as much as we knew as an industry that the print media was declining, the reality was that COVID-19 has kind of fast-tracked the demands and the drop in those numbers. But at the same time, Bongi, we've seen digital media organization actually pick up traffic. Now, we've had some growing by as much as 100%. I think that was News 24. We've seen other platforms also growing, digital platforms. So what that tells you is that the public out there is still looking for credible news. They're still looking for information, and they're looking into credible news sources for that information. So in as much as it has been bad for colleagues, but it also doesn't mean that broadcast media companies have not been affected, because we know that there have been retrenchments in some of the major companies, even that are not print per se.
What then becomes the role of SANEF then in such fights in newsrooms?
So SANEF, obviously, SANEF as an organization realizes the importance of our role and the space that they play, the role that we play in society and within the media industry. What we did upon realizing that was actually we set up a media relief fund for journalists. So what that fund has done actually from its inception, which was just a month or so ago, is that we've been able to raise about 3.5 million from individuals, but also corporate South Africa. Now, that fund is intended to assist journalists who would have lost their jobs or would have been retrenched in the period between March and June. So it's targeting those journalists, and it's not about changing their lives in a great, it's just money to actually assist them, do things like pay grocery buy groceries or even pay for school fees, because we know that COVID-19 has hit journalists and all other professions, actually, all in the industry, in the pocket. People have had their salaries reduced. So as SANEF, we couldn't just sit back and fold our arms. Hence, we set up that media relief fund, which will be paying out, actually, the first tranche of payments for those who applied will be in the coming week.
And Sbu, I really, want to delve deep into the issue of the importance of the work that we do, particularly around this time, and really being at the forefront. I mean, when you look at that documentary, there's, one journalist really succinctly put it. When we hear of a COVID-19 case, we almost want to go there and want to, talk to the people and bring the audience the news. How important is the work of journalists during this time? Because as we are facing shrinking newsrooms, it does not take away the importance of the work that we are doing, particularly around this time.
Exactly, Bongi. The reality is that COVID-19 has been a discovery for all of us. I say that we've been walking around blindly for the past 5 months as the story unfolds, as even scientists are trying to grapple with this. But that didn't stop journalists from being at the forefront of telling those stories. And I mean, we speak of the role that health workers play, the security services are playing, but equally important is the role that journalists have been playing around this time. Because what journalists, as journalists, we have been doing is that we've been telling this unfolding story of COVID-19 in this country, how we're responding to it, and more importantly, how it affects communities, and more importantly, how it affects the poor, and which explains why we had to, as that documentary explained, to award the Nat Nakasa Award for bravery to all the journalists, to the entire body of journalists in this country, to say, we recognize the work that you're doing, we recognize the important role that you're playing as journalists during this period, because we have not been immune to COVID-19. We have lost colleagues to COVID-19. We've had colleagues, as I said, become infected with COVID-19 while telling this story, and that didn't stop us. It didn't stop us as journalists. We continue to tell those stories, to be in those communities, to be there in the forefront and risk injury and sometimes risk infection.
And Sbu, of course, the pandemic also comes at a time when our credibility has been called into question. As the media, we've been seeing really some attacks on the work that we have been doing as the public continue to hold us to account. What then will be the role of SANEF under your leadership to ensure that credibility to this institution is restored and people really do begin to again trust the work of journalists?
Bongi, it's undeniable that as the media industry, we've gone through difficult times where there has, over time, a trust deficit has developed between ourselves and our audiences. And I think the cases, you know the stories that would have led to that. And the reality is we have been working as an industry, but also as an organization, to try and restore the credibility of the media. And we didn't just sit back. We were the first to say that, and remember, as journalists, we're not above criticism. It is fine, it is okay for the South Africans to hold us to account and to criticize us, but it's a different thing to threaten journalists and to stop journalists from doing their work. That said, Bongi, we did set up an ethics panel. There's a media ethics investigation panel, which is led by the retired judge, Kathy Satchwell, and assisted by some of our media colleagues, including Nigwe Pigicha and others. And what that media ethics committee is supposed to do is that it called on South Africans to write in and with their complaints where they've had issues with unethical journalism, or where they may have experienced unethical journalism. Now, the judge has been working over the past few months, and we expect that report at the beginning of September. Now, this is us as the media saying that we are aware of the blunders or the mistakes that have been made in the past. And what we're doing now is actually holding the mirror to ourselves, because we always hold the mirror to society. And as the media, as I say, we're not above scrutiny. So that is why we've actually set up that committee led by the retired Judge Kathy Satchwell to say what exactly is wrong, so that what we're trying to do is to restore that trust. It may not be is not going to be immediate. It's a work in progress. But I think it's important for us not to just sit back. So as SANEF, what we'll be doing is actually to make sure that in terms of the mandate that we have, the mandate is clear that we continue to champion media freedom as uppermost in terms of our priorities. But we're also aware that journalists are working under pressure, Bongi. Issues of mental health are things that we say that newsrooms and companies need to pay attention to, because the stress that we work under and the well-being of journalists is important in telling the South African story as we go forward.
And Sbu, I really want to touch on that as we end off this discussion, the importance and the wellness of journalists, because a lot of people really see us in the front lines and reporting and telling really sometimes very heartbreaking stories and difficult stories to really swallow. But the importance of our mental health as journalists is also as paramount as our credibility.
Exactly, Bongi, because the reality is that journalists believe themselves to be tough. You know, journalists are brought up, or when they get into a newsroom, they are told to chin up and be tough, you know. People have this image of journalists as these strong characters who are not feigned by anything, you know, who do not hurt, they just move on. But the level of trauma that actually we experience as journalists, I mean, you can imagine that it doesn't actually, it begins as you come in as a junior reporter, where you attend to a crime scene and where people have died, and the shock to your system. And what you're expected to do is just to tell the story and not emote. And I think that those are the kind of traumas that actually over time that build up, that actually are more, that had journalists over time. So it is important. And actually COVID-19 has exposed that. We would have seen in our newsrooms, in our own newsrooms and other newsrooms, the level of stress and anxiety that people experience, and especially in the infancy of the coronavirus outbreak, where we didn't know. In fact, even the experts didn't know. I mean, this is something that we learn as we go along. So it is important. Hence, we say it is actually important that media companies must pay attention to these newsrooms, must pay attention. Editors must pay attention to the mental health of journalists, so that we can continue to be able to tell the story of our country.
Well, Sbu, as we end off this discussion, once again, congratulations on being appointed SANEF chair. We certainly hope that the year, and of course, you know, during your reign and your tenure as SANEF chair, you are certainly going to be creating waves, because as politics editor here at Newzroom Afrika, we've really been seeing a lot of your good work. Thank you so much for your time tonight.